If you've got an issue, you must report it to a HSR if there is one. And I think if there is any better way to stop people reporting psychosocial risks in any way, shape or form, you mandate that it has to be reported to a HSR. I mean,
madness.
Lunacy.
The concept of psychosocial risk is far from new, but the dialogue and industry discussion about the topic has elevated since regulatory changes were announced in 2023 and 2024. Psychosocial risk is now the focus of many conversations in the corporate world, from boardrooms to executive teams, and of course through to the practitioners on the ground, trying to join the dots to have meaningful impact. I'm Kate Connors. I'm a Master's Qualified Psychologist, and my professional purpose is to help people and workplaces be at their best.
And I'm Greg Smith. I'm a lawyer who's spent more than 30 years practicing in the areas of employment law and workplace health and safety. I'm also the author of several books, including Paper Safe and the recently published Proving Safety.
And you are listening to Judgmental, when a psychologist and a lawyer walk into a barside chat about psychosocial risk. A big thanks to our sponsor, EML. EML are Australia's largest personal injury claims provider, providing claims management services to workers' compensation, life insurance and CTP markets, with the purpose of helping people get their lives back. We have another jam-packed episode today, so grab a drink and sit back for another discussion at the bar. So hello listeners, and welcome to a very special episode today of Judgmental, because we are in an actual bar. Mr. Smith, join me. Here we are.
Very exciting. This is our first time in an actual bar with a live audience, testing some of our ideas in front of people. So when we test our ideas in front of ourselves, they sound wonderful, but now we've got a bit of live feedback, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, exactly. And before we go any further, it's really important that we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today. And we are both on the same lands today, Greg, which doesn't happen very often, which are the lands of the Wiradjuri people of the Kulin Nation. And we would like to extend our gratitude, thanks for their custodian over this land for thousands of years. So, Mr. Smith, we have a guest, as we usually do. Today really is an episode where we wanted to, is it a milestone episode when we're recognising that now all states in Australia have formally got psychosocial regulations up and running? Because good old Victoria, come on Victorians, we were keen for this for a long time, but it didn't quite happen at the pace that it happened everywhere else. But it kicked off on 1 December 2025.
It's a milestone of sorts.
It is a milestone.
It's a milestone of sorts. And thankfully you scaled back from what was originally proposed. But
Mind me?
Oh, you were all over the shop. But you have got some interesting provisions in there that no one else had.
Oh, you mean Victoria. I thought that you were having
No.
Oh, right. Okay.
And you've got some interesting provisions in there, which I think...
The remedial plans and all that.
No, that doesn't worry me. The one that if you've got an issue, you must report it to a HSR if there is one. And I think if there is any better way to stop people reporting psychosocial risks in any way, shape or form, you mandate that it has to be reported to a HSR. I mean...
Madness.
Lunacy. But there we are. And it is mechanics over effectiveness.
Yeah. We will get into that, I'm sure. But because this is a very important moment, we are both in a bar, we have a room full of people with us, we must do our little routine and ritual, which is, what are we drinking today, Greg?
I think we've both got the same. I grabbed a Chardonnay off the tray out there, so I have a Chardonnay.
2 Chardonnays. Cheers, Mrs. Smith. Chin chin, clink.
Cheers
everybody. So with that, and before we invite our guests to come up, I've got a little surprise for you, Greg. Did you notice that in the run sheet that I had a surprise?
Yes, I read it carefully, Kate.
Do these look familiar to you, audience? Just handing those up. People who follow me on LinkedIn may have noticed a post a little while ago where I said that I had been cleaning out my study, and I found all sorts of things from many, many, many years ago, and these grabbed my attention. We have Injury Management Week 2001 from WorkCover WA. Open that up. There you go. You can see your name up in lights there. It's got Mr. Smith, hypothetical. Remember? Read it out. What was the hypothetical on this time?
Oh, it doesn't. It just says Mr. Greg Smith, Senior Associate, Employee Relations Group, Freehills. Oh, you think you're stressed, a hypothetical workers' compensation.
This is what we remember when we used to do hypotheticals for WorkCover.
Yeah, I do.
And then Injury Management Week 2002, 20th to 24th of May, another one.
You really need a hobby.
I know. But don't you think this is perfect timing that these just happened to come across my note just before you were going to be here for an hour?
So this is an interesting one. So this is 2002 when I was a partner at Jackson McDonald.
Yes.
20 years later, having left there, I'm a partner back there again. So that's interesting.
And you were talking about?
Implications of systems failure. My God, my topic hasn't changed in 23.
This is my point. This is exactly my point.
Nothing has changed in 23 years, and I don't think it's my fault.
Well, that was what struck me as I went through all of my old filing cabinets, is that nothing much has changed.
Right.
But anyhow, so there you go. Little blast from the past for you, Mr. Smith. Now that we've done that, I'm going to move on and invite our wonderful guest up to the stage to join us. Bring your drink, Kath. That's fine. And as I introduce you, everybody, I will just do a quick bio on Kath, and then if you could give her a warm welcome. This is Catherine Jeffries, and Kath is the Director of Health, Safety and Wellbeing at Monash Health. Do you want me to read the whole thing? Yeah, that's how I always feel when people do this to me. I think the key things here is the fact that Kath is the Director of Health, Safety and Wellbeing at Monash Health. So it's a very large, complex public health organisation. She, in that role, is overseeing safety strategy, psychosocial risk management, and also the workers' compensation portfolio. And there are 25,000 employees. How many sites?
9 major hospitals and multiple community centres and little clinics across the southeast.
Complex. And Kat's background is she was a registered nurse. She's got a grad dip in OHS. And we are very, very, very delighted that you are here to speak about psychosocial risk with us in Victoria. If everyone could give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Greg.
Oh, and so we're all drinking Shardy, are we? Is that what we all decided? Okay.
I want to be left out.
Okay. Well, when we had a chat online to prepare for today's conversation, Kath, I loved our conversation. And one of the statements that you said while we were chatting really stuck with me, and that is that when you leaned into this topic at Monash, you wanted the approach that you were leading to be creating something beyond compliance, and that was really important to you. Tell us about why that was so important to you, and how that's kind of playing out in this more regulated environment that we're all operating in now.
Thanks, Kate. Look, I'm very aware of how it works in operations. I'm very aware that we have very busy nurse managers managing huge caseloads, overrun clinics. And I think if you bring in just something that's purely compliance driven, you don't get engagement. So what we are aiming to do here is actually change the culture under the guise of compliance with the regulations. And as you can imagine, in health, we have every psychosocial risk listed in the book. And we're trying to manage it in a way that makes a real difference. We've actually managed to get it into the Monash Health strategy under the guise of joy in work, which you may be familiar with through the IHI.
Yeah. And I thought that was one of the key things that stood out to me in our conversation is the fact that you have really been able to elevate the profile really for everything to hang off in all of the other work that you do. Is that right? Like, was that a key part of how you began approaching this challenge?
Yes. Well, we've been setting the scene since 2022. And by the time the regulations came along and we did legal presentations to our board and executive, they were really listening because we had the conversation about mental health and wellbeing going already. because we know we need to change the stigma and we know we don't have a speak up culture. So that's what we have been working on up until now.
In our conversation, you also did speak to some of the key challenges as you've been doing this. And it's something that's been coming up quite a bit in conversations I've been having in the market, particularly in more unionised or industrial environments, is the weaponisation of the fear of that. Do you want to share a little bit more about that, or your kind of view on that, what you've been watching, seeing? And I imagine, Greg, you've got some interesting thoughts on this one. This is well and truly in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, that really concerns me because I think you can actually tick off every one of those 14 psychosocial hazards in a healthcare scenario. And if our managers aren't skilled up in how to deal with that, then yes, we've got an industrial problem because that's when the members go to their union and the union steps in. So the way we've managed that is to really develop a good working relationship, particularly with the ANMF. So I meet with them monthly. And I share with them everything that we're doing along the way because I say to them, at the end of the day, you're interested in the safety of your members. And guess what? So are we. We're actually coming from the same place here.
What are you noticing about this, Greg? This weaponisation kind of fear that everyone's got in the market?
Well, it's real. And it's always been real in the context of physical harm as well. Union rights of entry, and we've seen recent cases pulling apart the abuses of rights of entry for safety. I think the difficulty that we run into with psychosocial risk more than any other is we kind of, and the regulations don't do it, which again is one of the other opportunities lost, and we've talked about that on podcasts before. They don't navigate that difficult ground between privacy and disclosure. People who bring concerns about psychosocial risk who don't want to, quite frankly, involve a regulator or a HSR or a union, but then organisations who run the risk of destroying, in some ways, the trust relationships because of the vested interests of those sorts of parties. So having to notify a regulator, having to involve HSRs, and we haven't come up with a good formula for balancing discretion. Now, I mean, I understand what discretion looks like when it goes the wrong way. We were part of the WA inquiry into sexual misconduct in the West Australian mining industry, which has produced some quite horrific findings. And I saw in the press today there's this ongoing class action against BHP in relation to the way many women apparently have been treated in the industry. But we haven't created the right framework in the regulations for balancing people's privacy, which is interesting because I'm going to get the phraseology wrong here, Kate, and you'll correct me, but persons' autonomy over their own complaint.
Yes.
This has happened to me. This is how I want it dealt with.
The sense of control is really important while there's a psychological mechanism around fear and anxiety and trauma.
Yeah, which has often been seen as the trauma imposed by this sort of Disney villain employer, which I'm not sure all employers are quite the Disney villain in this area, which we make them out to be. But we don't, the way the regulations have progressed is we don't leave a lot of autonomy with an individual complainant for how the matter gets dealt with.
I think this is such an interesting and really big, wicked problem, to be honest, because if you think about it at a psychological level, and this is where, Kath, when you guys have put so much work into destigmatisation, and to me that's just such a critical underpinning to any organisation's meaningful work in this space. Because if an individual really does feel too scared, and I'm going to use plain language, feels too scared to say that they are becoming unwell because of something that's happened at work, we do know that there is safety in numbers. That is a real psychological experience, that you will feel safer if you are not one of the only people putting your hand up, right? And look at what happened in the Me Too movement. Look at, that's not, look at what's going on with the Epstein file. Like that's a real thing. Yet there is, to your point, I think, Greg, a fear that as soon as a collective response is kind of surfaces, that it loses the real impact that it's having for individuals, but B, you kind of, everyone gets into their corners, don't they, a little bit, rather than we'll sort it through in terms of the actual issues that are being talked about. Is that, what do you notice in this, Kath?
I think there's a real balance though, because as an employer, you have a responsibility to respond to a complaint or somebody who's concerned about something. And we're having this discussion at the moment because in the compliance code, it refers to the need to have confidential reporting. The regulations don't, so it's not regulation, but the code recommends that. And we're having a debate about that. And I maintain that, yes, we have a stop line. Yes, we have an HR advisory line. So we have mechanisms for that. But I'm not sure about introducing the psych regs and saying, no, it's secret, because we're actually trying to encourage you to speak up and feel empowered to talk to your manager or somebody about what you need. The company has a responsibility to respond, to look after their employees.
I think that issue is actually potentially at least going to result in structural shifts in organisations. So one of the biggest complaints I get from work health and safety people is, how do we design a work health and safety program around this if we're not allowed to see any of the data?
Yep.
So we can't see the information. HR get the complaints. We don't know how many there are. We don't know which parts of the business they're in. We don't know if they're day or night shift. We don't know if they're bullying or harassment or stress. We don't know. We know nothing about them because HR won't let us look at them. Whether you can, I think there's a limit to which you can make that data anonymous, because I'm not sure the complaints are quite as prevalent to say it's just a data set in a bigger data set. I think it's quite easy for organisations or individuals to understand where things are happening and literally work out who's involved. So I almost think, and this might be a mid-term response to it, and Kate and I, we've talked about care teams before in terms of case management to respond to individual complaints, but there's almost a case management response at a higher level that says we need to pull together a handful of experts within our organisation, and that's where these complaints sit. So they can be across both HR and safety to manage them. And as we get more comfortable with what these regulations look like, because we have no idea how they're going to play out in court yet. Speaking purely as a lawyer, we've got no idea how they're going to play out in court yet. I've got some ideas, but we don't know. So until we get that level of comfort, I suspect we might want specialist teams to be sort of managing those databases of information.
And when I mean, this is such a complex issue, and it's at the individual intervention and confidentiality level in terms of the very first person. And I'm sure, Kath, this is something that's come up in your conversations. The manager or a peer or whoever somebody might share that there's something happening or that their mental health is really impacted. And particularly if it is a complaint-orientated trigger. And the fear that you see in an individual when they hear bureaucracy, or, well, we should tell HR, or we need to do an incident report, or we need to do X, Y, or Z.
Or this might have to be reported to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And you watch someone's psychological stability unravel right in front of your eyes at the idea of bureaucracy getting involved. They just wanted some support. They just wanted some advice. They just, how are you guys managing that kind of tension at the moment at Monash?
Perhaps I'll talk about where we've come from, because we're trying to empower our managers to actually create a mentally healthy workplace and to be able to support somebody who does need assistance. And we're trying to empower people to talk about, when they're not travelling so well. So we kind of catch it before it gets to that complaint. Well, I mean, that's ideal, isn't it? But we realise that we need to upskill our managers to manage this. And this is what we're hearing from them too.
Yeah.
And also, being healthcare workers, they assess and fix. So if they have somebody who has a psychological issue, and there was a case where somebody was suicidal, and the manager drove to another site to support that person who was expressing suicidal ideation because they felt that it was their role to do so. And I've seen this happen in other organisations. They don't know when to stop and refer.
Yeah.
They feel like they need to jump in.
Yeah. So that tension or the balance between an individual saying, please don't tell anybody, I just want some help. How would the current system that you have designed and some of the cultural levers that you've been working on, in your system design and your vision of that, how do you see that being effectively mitigated?
Yeah, so perhaps I'll start at the beginning with Thrive, will I? And
Yeah,
talk
great
about the
idea.
culture we're
Yep.
trying to create. So back in 2022, when we heard that these psych regs were coming into place, we did do a psychological hazard risk assessment with Centre for Corporate Health, and they came back to us with what our key enterprise level risks were, being occupational violence, exposure to trauma, work demands, a whole series of things, plus protective factors. People get a sense of real satisfaction out of working in health. So we gathered all of this information. We set up some what we called leading mentally healthy teams training for our managers, trained 600 people. That was our starting place.
Yep.
Then we worked with Pucker Up to kind of untangle all of this feedback that we had. And we realised that there were four key themes that we needed to address.
Do you want to share a little bit about who Pucker Up is?
Yep.
Because they've got an interesting backstory, don't they?
Yeah, so Wayne Schwass developed Pucker Up. He has lived experience with suicide, and their mission is to prevent suicide in Australia. And he is the most energised, wonderful man, and
Beautiful.
really helped us to operationalise this, because our whole mantra is that this has to mean something to people and they've got to be able to put it into their everyday work. And so through that work with Wayne, we decided that we needed to validate that working in health is uniquely challenging, because it is every day. You're dealing with people who are not having the best day of their life. We need to normalise the conversation about mental health, and just saying the word mental health. I can't tell you the challenge it took with our comms team to actually say that, and not wellbeing. That's what they wanted to say.
What about mental illness? Are you allowed to say mental illness?
Yeah, we are now. Yeah.
I remember the same conversations. You're not saying stress. No, people wanted me to say stress,
No.
not mental health or mental illness.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And then the fourth one is encouraging pause for rest and recovery, because healthcare workers tend to smash it out for 13 hours a day and they're very selfless. And finally, that speak up culture. So that we developed that with Wayne. We then developed videos, storytelling of what that meant to our people, podcasts interviewing people with how they manage that, because we're trying to come from a place of thriving in health. And being responsible for our own mental health as well. You can't just put it all back onto the organisation. So that was, I guess, the foundation that we've been working on up until the regs came out. And so now, and we designed the name Thrive with consultation. Personally, I thought it was a bit naff and had been used before, but it's what everyone wanted. So that's what we went with. And now that we've got a brand, they know what Thrive is.
Yeah.
And so we're going to continue to build on that. So the next phase is thriving teams, which I'll talk about later.
Yeah. It's when I listened to that story, it took me back to my time at PwC and how I had a newfound respect and incredible amounts of gratitude for people who in the comms team. Like when you've got a really great comms team that really do know the culture, do know what works, do know what lands, then you've got a wonderful opportunity for a cultural lever. Was that your experience?
Oh, absolutely. I must say, once we got past the mental health word, they've been absolutely instrumental in us landing this program. We've flooded every single comms channel with Thrive, and it's still hard to get to 25,000 people who are predominantly working at the bedside and not behind a computer. So we keep going.
So, Greg, you often talk about the culture with a little bit of skepticism. Would that be fair?
A lot.
Yeah. So I do know you.
Skepticism.
Yes. Well, when you listen to Kath share that story about Monash's approach, where'd your brain go? What was your natural skeptical lawyer brain doing?
Two things. Intellectually, I get it as important. The idea of the culture of organisations matters. I've done work years and years ago with a special air service regiment in Western Australia. And if you want to talk about culture and high performance teams, that's about as high performing as you get. So I understand what it looks like.
I hear a but.
Yeah, a huge juicy butt coming up. And I say this without any understanding of what Monash has done. In lots of organisations, culture is a shortcut for not doing the hard work necessary to manage the risks in the business. We'll just run a culture program, all right? And we think that fixes everything. And the second thing is I challenge anybody in the room to go and read 30 years worth of case law with prosecutions in workplace health and safety and find the word culture. It's not in there. You get prosecuted, no one's talking about your culture, no one cares. Okay, what was the hazard? What were the controls? Did you put your controls in place? I understand culture is important for ensuring that what you say you do is what happens, but it's not a legal defence. And unless you've got the assurance processes to back up your cultural systems, it's just an activity that you're engaged in. And I know it's important. I go to different organisations, and you can feel the culture. You know what feels different.
Well, it's a protective factor to use psychosocial language. Do you reckon, Kath? Where would you put it in the psychosocial language?
I would accept that.
Yeah, you would accept that? Why, thank you.
I highly would accept that.
And I actually agree with you, Greg. This is just setting the tones because we knew that the regulations were coming and we were coming from a place where we have a put up and shut up sort of culture is the way I've used the word again. But that's the way healthcare workers are. Their patients are first. And so I actually said I want an ad campaign so we get people talking about mental health. So I actually wasn't, using the culture word. But it was just sort of setting the foundation for where we go to now with risk assessment and the next phase of the program.
I think part of the problem, and language matters. I believe that language matters. And I think part of the problem with the word culture is that every sociologist and anthropologist and every other ologist has dived into the conversation, whereas what we're really talking about is just what are the expectations of the organisation. And the expectations are, if you are concerned about your mental health and wellbeing, you can talk to somebody about it and they will listen to you respectfully. So I think if we talk more about expectations of organisations, it makes more sense to me. Now, that's just me, right? This is a very me thing. I just find it's so easy to obfuscate behind the language of culture without actually saying what you really want.
I was at an event last week in Sydney, Leadership Shift, and Ben Crow, who is a very well-known performance coach in Australia, has worked with all the legends of Ash Barty, etc. He was quite provocative in saying to the audience he did not believe that the word expectation should appear anywhere in organisations these days. And Holly Ransom, who is emceeing, said, well, what's the other word? What's the word that should replace that? And primarily the conversation was around like annual performance reviews, where expectations, what's your role expectation? And his suggestion was standards. These are the standards that we expect of you. And to me, that that story came into my mind in terms of your reference before, Greg, to your army experience, right? Like it is very much around standards and there is assurance, isn't there, around the repetition of the way you do things and you do it to a certain standard and you're drilled in standards, which is quite different to how a lot of cultural programs are actually designed and rolled out.
So this is one of the difficulties, at least with language and culture and what we're trying to do these days, because, and again, I'll pick on my military and drifting into my legal careers, it was about expectations. And expectations had hard baked into them standards. But it wasn't, I think the issue was when I look back over those sort of two professional paths, the language didn't matter. Everybody knew what was expected, okay? And I think part of the challenges, particularly for really large organisations, is creating that consistency, whether you call it culture or standards or expectations or whatever
It's repeatable behaviours at high levels of frequency that change the way that things are done around here, essentially.
Code of conduct, a way of working, isn't it?
Yeah. Hey, Kath, I'm conscious of time and there are a couple of other questions that we wanted to get to before we shift gear. I know, I stole your line. Greg was mentioning it in the incident reporting challenge, in that mechanism of who's allowed to see what and how that operates within organisational structures. Within the psychosocial risk context, we've talked about this a lot, the importance of breaking down organisational silos, like break down this is my information, you can't see that. How does that work between HR, workplace health and safety, employee relations, if there's depending on the site, etc. Now, how have you guys approached that? Have you designed something in, and that's a leading question because I know you have, to try to break down those silos to make sure that this is operating with congruence across the organisation?
Great question, Kate. Yes, we realise that this doesn't necessarily just sit with OHS. It's very much an OHS approach, but there's so much that is owned by people and culture. So we've actually set up a Wellbeing steerco that has a mixture of our learning and development team, our HR business partners, safety. We've got a bit of cultural safety thrown in there. There's a whole mix. Anyone that's got anything to do with this space is on the Wellbeing steerco, which helps to break down silos with the way we're working, but it also helps design the program cross-functionally.
You go, Greg.
No, I was going to say that I think psychosocial regulations are an enormous missed opportunity. But one of the opportunities that they are now presenting is the chance to restructure some of our organisations along those lines to better align all of the separate functions towards people's wellbeing.
Now, information technology platforms and systems and things, and how those tend to be owned because the license for them sits in one person's budget and all that stuff. How are you dealing with that in terms of where information or data is stored and how that is managed?
We have the lovely Riskman incident reporting system that we all struggle with in health. So we continue to use that and use our existing channels. I know there's some lovely risk assessment tools out there with pretty dashboards and things, but we haven't gone for that to start with. We're trying to take a really practical approach.
Say more about that.
Well, I'm just wondering what that actually delivers. What's the difference? So yes, we are about 20 years behind and we do use a paper-based risk assessment process. And we're not going to change that for the moment because I think we need to educate people in what is risk assessment, what are their psychosocial hazards, and in a Monash Health context, what does that actually mean and what are some control measures in our context as well? So that forms the basis of our next part of the program.
You did a thumbs up when Kath said,
the more documents you have
here we go,
in your organisation that has one of those 3x3 or 5x5 coloured risk matrices, the more likely it is you'll be unable to defend any prosecution that is brought against you. They are the bane of my existence as a lawyer. Absolutely hate them as a tool. You will not find a prosecution in this country ever where there has been an argument between defence and prosecution whether something should have been an M1 or an M2. Are we editing out language?
Don't look at me. I don't know. I'm not the person who's against the Queen.
Right? No one. It doesn't matter. No one cares. The colour of the box doesn't matter. It's an irrelevance. I'm actually talking to something with Kath on Friday, and I found a quote from a case that actually mentions the risk matrix, and the only reason it mentioned it was to undermine the defence in a prosecution in a fatality, where defence counsel had to concede it was simply a coincidence that every risk in the JHA was ranked as medium. And the court went on to say, well, this is indicative of the fact that this was just a tick and flick process. There should be one risk matrix in your organisation. It sits at the top, and your workers should never see them. Never, in my view.
Ooh, controversial. I look forward to our Q&A, which is coming up because from the response from the audience, I think there are a few red boxes and green boxes and amber boxes sitting in risk registers in some of the organisations represented here today. Now, Kath, is there any last takeouts that for people listening and for people that we're about to share more drinks with that you would like to share in regards to your approach, the impacts that you're already noticing from the work that you've done. Give us something inspirational. Go.
Okay. 2 seconds. So I'd just like to quickly talk about the next phase here and how we've genuinely engaged with people, because I think that's very important. Because if we come up with a program that we do to the operation, they will not be interested. So I'm spending a lot of time talking to the executive, to senior leaders, to the board with our approach, and I have endorsement now for the way we're going to go. And the way we are going is we've divided 25,000 people up into 20 programs. We're doing focus groups in 20 programs to really hear what the key actual issues are without a red box or a green box. And then we are also doing a desktop review of our procedures to see if there are any gaps with the regs coming in, because we've got a lot in place already. And then
The regs are in, remember?
the regs are in, yes, of course. And then each program will be looking at their actual issues. Is it, trauma associated with looking after really unwell mental health patients, or what is the actual issue here? And the nursing cohort have already said to me, the nurses won't have time for that. No, the nurse managers are too busy. I said, well, there's a problem right there. We need to understand why.
Leadership, role design.
Yeah.
Hello. Don't get me started on that one. Isn't that right? Friends in the audience with nods. Yes.
So I think the key message is engagement, make it practical and operational, and then you've got half a chance.
Yeah. Brilliant. We will be continuing this conversation after a short break, and we will be right. And could everybody please join me in thanking Cass for joining us this afternoon?
Thank you, Kate and Greg.
Well, thank you, listeners, for sticking with us. We here in the room have rehydrated, filled glasses, had a little nibble on some delicious food. And we're just going to kick off with a Q&A with the audience. But before we do that, Greg, you and I were going to have a little banter about something. And you're looking at me blankly and you can't remember that we agreed to this. But remember I said I was going to suggest that we kicked this off with when and why do organisations need to engage with a psychosocial risk provider?
Because they need expert advice.
So that's the only reason?
Yeah, I think so. Psychosocial risk has created this void. Most organisations, and there's a socioeconomic problem in safety in that large organisations have stuff and small organisations don't. Right? I had a prosecution coming up now for an organisation where a worker's lost an arm. Small business, they don't have policies, they don't have procedures, they don't do cultural surveys, they're not talking about psychosocial risk, and they never will. Right? That's not the nature of the organisation. And we have to be careful not to overcook it. Victoria has developed a reasonably good code of practice around workplace health and safety, around psychosocial risk, and it says these are the things that can cause psychosocial harm. So do you need to engage somebody to tell you what can cause psychosocial harm in your business? No, you've got a regulator who's put a code of practice. And the prosecutor, by the way, will go to the code of practice, right? They will not reinvent psychosocial risk just to prosecute you. Or okay, they will go to the code of practice and they'll say workload, job demand, autonomy. And you've got about 15, I think, or so, whatever in the code. So could this arise in our business? Yes. How? Like this. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to make sure it works? Quite frankly, that's kind of the end of your risk assessment. You want to have conversations with people because under, I don't know what section it is in your legislation because
consultation.
Yeah, you got to talk to people and say, does this sound right to you? Yeah, it sounds right to us. How does it arise for you? It arises like this for us. And that's it. And then what you need is a psychologist or a subject matter expert to come in and say, we think workload's a problem. This is what our people are telling us. This is how we want to manage it. Do you think that sounds right? How do we test it? This is what you do to make sure that that's working.
So can I compare your answer with what Copilot told me when I asked Copilot? So I thought that this would be funny to see what Copilot said. Why are you looking so nervous? Have a sip, relax.
Because AI is criminally irresponsible.
I'm But you call me a criminal.
Destroys the planet and doesn't work. When we get you to write your first book, Kate,
Oh, yeah, he's been
you realise how bad AI is.
Okay. Oh, sure, but it's fun because listen to what Copilot told me. So there's pages of it. Look how many pages it told me. I was just like, wow, this is actually a very interesting answer. I'll just give you the headlines. Firstly, it was about because you have to meet your legal and regulatory obligations. Secondly, it was about have a check of your internal capability, capacity and expertise because WHS and HR teams tend to be overstretched and or have limited psychosocial risk experience. Then it mentions you need to consider your organisational risk profile. Then it speaks to, well, what does your data say in regards to elevated risk? Then it says also consider whether you need a provider because have a think about your organisational's maturity in workplace health and safety and wellbeing. Then it says about the complexity of the work environment. Then it says providers can be helpful for objectivity and psychological safety. Then it says providers can be helpful because it can integrate all of that into strategic goals and culture for the organisation. Then it says you might not have enough internal resources. And then it says you definitely need a psychosocial risk provider if your organisation has 3 or more of the following indicators, which I'm not going to read to you because it's just going to make you mad. But then this is the bit that I thought was so hilarious because at the end it says to me, Kate, if you'd like, I can turn this into a simple checklist. Look at his face. Isn't that classic? So there you go, everyone. Have a look at that. Test what ChatGPT says about the value of psychosocial.
We'll throw to questions, but I want to read this, okay?
Okay, yeah, go.
I don't think people understand how fundamental, and I'm talking as a lawyer, right? Legal risk management. So what's happening in Monash is they're looking after their people, and that's absolutely terrific and what you should do. I'm playing the lawyer here, right? And I want you to understand the fundamental basis of legal risk management. So this is a BMD Construction versus Nicholson. It's a new Queensland District Court decision, 2026 QDC 5. It's paragraph 216 if you're interested, 30 Jan 2026. Prosecution submitted, and I agree, that if these risk minimisation measures, I can't read my own writing, measures are nominated in BMD's own safety system material, it is reasonable to infer that these measures were reasonably practicable to have been implemented at the time. It would be illogical to decide that the control steps identified within BMD's own manuals were never genuinely intended to be implemented. It is reasonable to infer that these identified measures were not listed merely to pay lip service to safety measures, but were listed so that they would be implemented. If you write this crap down, you are expected to do it. And that is the biggest source of legal risk you have in your organisation. And I think this is the biggest problem, or one of the biggest problems we have with psychosocial risk at the moment, is this irrational knee-jerk reaction to fill a void that we still don't understand yet. We don't know how the courts are going to deal with this stuff, right? And we flood it with aspirational statements of intention, which will be used against you. So stop producing policies and procedures unless you have the resources, capacity and energy to implement them.
No, my brain, as I was listening to you then, I mean, I've heard stories of workplace health and safety, people within organisations, stressed, under-resourced, and they're searching for the policy that they're going to suggest to their exec on the internet.
I've been in meetings where organisations have had a risk assessment done by an external organisation that produces one of those spider diagrams, right? And they're arguing between the difference between 84 and 85, as if anyone gives a shit.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that this is also really important in terms of the key thing that comes up for practitioners who within their role have an accountability to move this stuff forward in their organisations, and then they, with big hearts and full commitment to doing their jobs well, kick off a psychosocial risk assessment process because they know that that's what needs to, well, they think that they know that that's what needs to happen. Sorry, I stand corrected. Thank you, So thank you, Judge. And then the outcomes of those risk assessments start heading up the chain, and because their risk controls are meaningful and very well thought through and designed, they're then putting budget allocation next to these things, and they start getting up to senior leaders, and it's just like, what the hell is this? And I think the influencing skills that need to be considered to really properly frame these things before they're kicked off is something that doesn't get talked about enough as well.
I agree, but if I can pick a flaw in our live audience sort of program,
Go.
we don't leave a lot of space for questions.
So, right. That was him in another way saying, we're nearly out of time. So, questions. We have a roving mic. Here we go. So we're going to keep a little space just in case.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks so much for the podcast. I know for one, I get a lot out of it, and I know some of my team members do as well. So thanks. I think I don't know if it's a question or an observation around, have people leaders lost their edge in terms of, I guess, their roles and responsibilities of leaning into difficult conversations? And I don't just mean in relation to performance management. I think I mean in relation to just being empathetic, checking in with their team, managing incivility that's occurring within their team, rather than deferring directly to HR or OHS when anything in their space sort of touches on this. And I think, I'm just keen to hear views on it, really.
Great question. And Kath, we think you've got some brilliant responses.
I could not agree with you more. And that's what I was saying before. We need to upskill our managers to actually lead and to manage these things at the front before it becomes a big issue that has to be managed by P&C. So that's definitely our focus, teaching our managers about what this means and how you actually create a mentally healthy team. And as you say, it's just basic respect for each other, isn't it? You know, we lost our way completely. So, yes, I guess I agree with you.
Can I sort of give a view on this?
Yes, we know you can.
I 18 months ago, I had a performance management review of a person who's no longer with us.
I think you remember asking me about this.
And I describe, and I've learned a lot in the meantime from other people. And I explained to them, I said, listen, I've been in a similar situation to you. I remember when I was a young lawyer 34 years ago, and the partner walked into me and he threw the advice I drafted at me, and then he threw a red pen at me and he said, you tell me what's fucking wrong with it, and walked away. And I said to this young lawyer, I said, now we're not allowed to do that anymore. So let's go through the advice together. I'm not a good role model in this area, but I accept there is a balance between that and actually being, I'm quite comfortable having difficult conversations, but lots of people aren't. But I'm not very good at having them, which is, so that's the problem. If the people who are comfortable having difficult conversations are not good at having them, and the people who are good at having them won't have them, we kind of have vacated the middle ground.
There are a couple of key points that I tend to say to organisations or leaders that ask me that kind of question. And a couple of things. One is definitely an anxiety, a capability issue, an anxiousness that people have about saying the wrong thing. And we think about that in our own personal relationships when there is a conversation that we need to lean into in our marriages or with our parents or siblings or close friends, and we avoid those conversations. So how realistic is it that just because it's written as a dot point of a standard or an expectation or whatever on a job description, that leaders and managers need to do it without thinking about that with a more of a systems lens about how we enable people to be better at that is one? Or are you really desperate to say? Okay. And then the second point, which is my usual thing around what is being expected of leaders in today's environment. And we all know that the more irritable, stressed, nervous, under the pump, overwhelmed, potentially burn it out that people are in a leadership role, the way that their performance drops. And the key contributors to those things is the workload and what's being expected of leaders in most organisations, and the fact that the design of leadership roles has not kept pace with what is needed in today's working world. And until leadership roles, and I mean the full scale spectrum of leadership, because it's a word that gets used from frontline leaders who are earning $75,000 a year, all the way through to people being paid millions of dollars a year. And that's one problem, in my view, until we start really segmenting down the skills and capabilities required at different levels of leadership, and then designing leadership roles accordingly, and then providing the very in-depth and well-considered approach to training people on how to be better at those conversations. This stuff won't change. And this is something, when I looked at my filing cabinet from the 1990s, that was being talked, like this is a conversation that has been going on my entire career. And I am getting, this is probably my thing where I get on my soapbox the way that you get on your soapbox about checklists, because I just cannot believe that we are still talking about the same thing after all this time.
So two-part question. People in the room, how many people here feel more uncomfortable raising performance issues with their workers because of the psychosocial regulations?
Show of hands.
None? Okay. Uncomfortable, yeah. Or concerned that
that there might be some repercussions if you... Yep.
And do you think that's an issue?
I know it's an issue because people say it's an issue, but I think that there's another layer underneath that. I think that the deeper layer, because I can't think of a better word right now, the enablement layer is different to what is the first thing that people think when they say why they don't do it.
Oh, yeah. No, you'll come up with a different excuse for why you don't do it.
Yes.
But yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think that psychological safety has become synonymous with psychosocial hazard. And I did have to have a performance management conversation with someone who threw back at me, I don't feel psychologically safe, which is quite different from what we're talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
And by the way, I'm just having a civil conversation with you about your performance. But that in that case, I felt it was weaponized.
In this program that I went to last week, the conversation at a leadership development kind of level was around the importance of adults sitting in discomfort and the ongoing need in adult development, as that aligns to leadership development, that we are only going to keep evolving and growing as leaders with an increasing capacity to deal with discomfort internally. And unfortunately, the easier answer, and it probably connects in with that, maybe the weaponization kind of idea a little bit, is for people to say, I don't feel safe. Whereas actually, I mean, maybe they don't, but I think if we were to map that out on a standard distribution, that is probably being overused. And actually what's more accurate in terms of what's going on is that people are feeling uncomfortable. Yeah.
There's a question there, but just to pick up on that, the language we're seeing in the courts, they're not talking about not feeling safe. They've picked up all of the language of the codes of practice, and that's given them an entirely new language to describe their concerns, particularly in general protections claim. In fact, the Fair Work Commission has put out new guidance on dealing with AI-generated general protections claims, which are being driven particularly from the language of the codes of practice. So people say, I feel bullied at work, draft me a general protections claim. I don't know how you use AI, but apparently it's something like that. And it does. It just picks up all the language of the codes of practice. Sorry.
Yep. I'm not quite sure if this is a question or just a comment. We'll see how we go. But just thinking about that deeper level that you were talking about, Kate, we've been doing quite a bit of work around generational dynamics in the legal profession and how the different generations that are coming through and their expectations around wellbeing are putting pressure, I suppose, on the older generations who didn't grow up with those concepts. So being a Gen X lawyer myself, going through as a junior lawyer, there was lots of those incidences that weren't really conducive to my well-being, but I didn't think about that as well-being. I wasn't trained in it. I didn't appreciate what it meant. And a lot of people in my position, and I suppose a lot of people in my generation that are now in senior leadership roles, who didn't grow up with leadership, with well-being, didn't grow up with the language, let alone the systems, are now expected to lead the younger generations and comply with regulations around well-being. And so it's a bit of a pressure cooker for them and their well-being.
And that's what I think I refer to when I speak to how fit for purpose are the current design of leadership roles, as well as leadership standards and expectations in terms of the modern workplace. And when there hasn't been, there is research that puts a little bit of a question mark around this, this idea that there are significant differences across the generations. There's not a lot of substantive research that backs that up, evidence-based research that backs it up. But people speak about it all the time in terms of it just feels different. It feels like it's harder. It's, they want this and they want these conversations and we never had that and all that kind of stuff. So it's certainly a valid experience that's happening. But I certainly, in my, with my lens over things, I think that as the literacy increases, which it needed to, as the regulatory environment changes, which it kind of needed to, we can't afford, our community just can't afford to for the systems to stay the way that they are. And yet I don't know anybody that would say that the way that leadership roles are being designed at the moment have the same quantum sense of difference as the way that the workplace experience is.
It's not just, that's a very personal one. So it's not the design of leadership roles on its own. It is who picks up the slack in the work that has to be done, who bears the brunt of the achievement of budget.
Yeah. And
you can't design your way out of that without changing the economics of the structure of the organisation. Yep. It is quite literally as simple as that. And if you're an equity partner in a law firm, you do not have a lot of interest in redesigning the economics.
And I mean, I heard a podcast somebody say the other day, if you ask a question and then another question and you're trying to get to the answer of, well, why, eventually the answer is money. And
Yes.
And I think that unfortunately this is another example of that, particularly in a professional services environment with the way that those organisations are designed. Yeah.
I think professional services are particularly vulnerable in a way that mining is not, for example. Mining is vulnerable to this in a bit more of a sort of cataclysmic shockwave. You can get horrific claims that come out of mining on an individual by individual basis, whereas some of the stuff we're talking about strikes at the heart of professional services and my entire working career, 35 years structure of those things.
Yeah, because we're the widgets in professional services.
We are the widgets, yeah.
And we have a question over here.
Thank you. I'm just interested in the legal viewpoint on consultation as part of the risk management process, and in speaking with many organisations and the processes they go through around focus groups and obtaining insights that way, there's still many people who don't participate in focus groups. And is there a case for them to argue that they weren't consulted during that process? And a second part to the question is a survey tool a feature of the risk management process that could allow an organisation to say, we consulted with the entirety of our business because the survey link went out to everyone.
Consultation's interesting. We don't really have a strong sense of it in WHS yet. Most of it comes from industrial relations, and the industrial relations case law says it's not a right of veto. You just have to have this genuine opportunity to respond. I think survey tools are a way to do that. When you talk about consultation, for example, around industrial relations, enterprise agreements, mass emails tend to be okay. I think in the area of psychosocial risk, you probably do need some support around methodologies to get that information out. I'm not sure let me step back. Absolutely, surveys are a tool that you could use to demonstrate consultation. Okay, what's the risk of surveys? The risk of surveys is that sitting somewhere deep within their bowels is a piece of information which means you knew or you ought to have known that this was a particular risk in your organisation. So they're kind of an uncontrollable consultation method. So I wouldn't discount them in that category. Just don't expect them to be a tool that is evidence that you're doing everything reasonably practicable. Again, it depends a bit on the size of the organisation, but I would be more inclined, if I'm running the rock show, I'm consulting about the control measures. We are concerned about our workload. This is what we want to do to try and manage it. Does that work for you? We're concerned about bullying. If this is our reporting mechanism, does that work for you? This is our training program. Does that make sense? I have always, in my career, been concerned that we spend a disproportionate amount of time trying to understand the risk as opposed to confirming whether what we're going to do works. I think if we shifted 90% of our attention into is what we're doing works, we would probably be better off.
I think that that's such an important message because I think there is a lot of market activity around survey tools to assess the risk. I don't think that there's the same quantum of market activity around the consultation, around the controls. Yeah. And I think that that's when the focus group methodology is probably going to, but that's hard with 25,000 people, isn't it, Kath? Yeah. Maybe one more question if there is one. And if there's not, that is absolutely fine because there's a bar, there's snacks. We can continue chatting, but hello.
Hey, Louis.
Hello. Thanks. You might have covered this in the podcast already. I'm just at the start of season 2, but it's around what you mean by psychological literacy. Or you talk about safety literacy and psychological literacy, but what should an organisation know and understand about that as a topic?
I've never been asked that. What a great question. How am I going to answer it?
Might want to top up your drinks.
So for me, psychological literacy is about understanding how humans work and what works for humans. So everything to do with the psychological processes around our thought patterns, how our thought patterns impact our emotions and our behaviours, from what are the things that motivate people to do things differently, through to how does our family environment impact how we're likely to respond in a moment of criticism or playfulness, through to reward and recognition and what works to create behaviour change. Like, it's so many things that play out in the day-to-day functioning of an organisation ultimately is about how humans tick. And I don't think it's about everybody becoming psychologists. I think it's about people pausing to think about what does the theory say if we're about to embark on a great big change program? What does the theory say around what really works in regards to bonuses? What does the theory say in regards to the impact of trauma? All of those things will play out day to day in workplaces, and that's what makes workplaces complex, adaptive systems intersecting with so many different challenges. And that's what, gets me out of bed in the morning. But to me, when I spoke about psychological literacy and Greg, I was probably more, to be honest, playing off Greg's safety literacy, and just so that we both had a pillar, to use corporate language. But that is really what I was meaning, just to try to elevate people's understanding about what the theory tells us about what works and what doesn't. Yeah. Now, with that, I just wanted to close with a couple of points. One, Kath, you mentioned at the break, and I just want to say this on your behalf because I thought it was a beautiful anchor for anybody working in this space to boost our protective factors about the reason we do this work when it's so hard. And Kath said to me, I do this and I want to make sure it works because those healthcare workers, they are the salt of the earth, best people, they're extraordinary people, and I want to make this workplace better for them. And I just think that is such an important thing to think about when you're working in this space, is to stay connected to something really meaningful that matters like that. So, Kath, I hope you don't mind that I share that, but I just thank you for the work that you do for all of the 25,000 people at Monash, and I'm sure, even though they probably don't know who you are, that if they understood the role that you're playing, they would be very grateful. And so to everybody else who works in this space, find that, because you need your own protective factors to keep working, because this is hard slog. Greg, any other final comments for you before we then go a little off mic for a little close from our podcast listeners and we get more in the room again?
No, you're good with all the humanistic empathy stuff. I'm just a lawyer. So
notice that many words uses the word just. That we should do some coaching on that.
Yeah, there's a wonderful sofa at the back. I've got to lie down and tell you about my childhood. I'll leave you to close up.
Okay, that's a great kick-off to season 3. Thank you, listeners, and we'll look forward to having you in the bar again with us next time. Thank you very much, everyone here. That's a wrap for another episode of Judgmental. Thanks again to our sponsors, EML. EML's Mutual Benefits Program provides organisations with free services, tools and resources to manage their workplace risk. You can follow EML, myself and Greg on LinkedIn, and be sure to check the show notes for links to the papers referenced in each episode, as well as resources available to help you as you navigate the wonderfully complex and nuanced world of psychosocial risk. See you again next time at the bar.